virtual background for a moment. Mhm. 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 Mhm.
All of us catch hell from the same enemy. We're all in the same bag, in the same boat. We suffer political oppression, economic exploitation, and social degradation. All of them from the same enemy. The government has failed us. You can't deny that. Anytime you're living in the 20th century, 1964, and you walking around here singing, "We shall overcome," the government and the white liberals who have been posing as our friends have failed us. And once we see that all these other sources to which we turn have failed, we stop turning to them and turn to ourselves. We need a self-help program.
Self-help program, he said. That was Brother Malcolm X, and he said those words back in 1964, and it is now 2025. Yeah, and I'm rocking, the way we rock in Philly, on the side crew cut on this Saturday night, this Saturday evening here. And let's see, I can't make this screen bigger. What are we wanting to do? I cannot do what I want to do, so I'm just gonna leave it alone because I'm concerned if I hit that X, I might just shut us all off. Let me just see anyway. We can close that, and okay, we can open that. That's what I want to see. Hey, I can see me a whole lot better, and you can see me. Yeah, I really prefer it up front. This is my flavor. This is my style. Welcome, greetings, Hotep Akwaba, bless up, and welcome back to the recovery zone of racism non-anonymous. Why? Because racism in the lives of this African descendant is not a secret, and therefore, in order for me to support my continued healing and recovering, I need to expose the secret because I understand that we are as sick as our secrets. And I am interested in healing. How about you? I I am Sis Abana Africa, the recovering African who is still very much culturally enslaved here in America. And I am a representative from the voices here in the margins. I am a representative from the voices in the margins. And I am true to the cause of African liberation via unification, utilizing the tool of healthy and effective communication. I am a traumatized traumatologist, trauma queen, and queen of trauma. And that is understanding trauma and traumatic stress, what it is, and how it has and continues to work in the lives of African descendants. First and foremost, this African descendant, and what I have learned about myself and the tools that I have gathered and collected to support my continued healing and recovering, yet, for the most part, most importantly, protecting myself from the shit. The shit that has hit the fan and is flying freely. And that shit is traumatic stress of the human intentional type. TSHIT, the shit. That's the shit. Traumatic stress of the human intentional type creates deep emotional wounds that, when they are unattended to, create physical complications, because our mind, body, and spirit are connected. They're one. I can't put on three fingers, mind, body, spirit. There's three of them. They're one, right? What it hits one hits the other. And because we carry such deep emotional wounds, that's the shit that people are full of. And they show up. They only show up in people's thoughts, what they think, and they tell you what they think when they open their mouths and talk, and or when they use their body in any kind of way to communicate an action, communicate a thought, communicate intent, right? Thought and behavior is what they're thinking and what they do that lets us know what they are feeling. Because when they say and or do something to hurt you, that is a reflection of what they are feeling inside of them, because that's what comes out. Shit that hurts, either in what you're saying or what you're doing. This shit hurt. Like, what the fuck? You say what? Why you? Oh. And we tend to suck it up like that. We suck it up and we brush it off. Man, that's just them. They don't know what they talking about. That's just them. It's just how they talk. Even though what they said was some fuck shit. Some fuck shit. Like, yeah. Yeah. So that's who I am. That's what I do as a communications coach, as yeah, standing on and bringing with me and coming in the spirit of Marcus, Malcolm, and Martin, where they taught the importance of our reflection of ourselves as a people, as a group, as a people. And in order to do so, you want to see yourself as an individual first. And do you identify as a person that reflected them in any way? Are you able to identify with any of those messages? And if the answer is yes, then the message that they had for you and for me was a message that said and suggested that we could, should, we could, and we should. It would be helpful, it would be useful for us to learn some shit about ourselves. What can I say? Yo, this is what Malcolm said. I told you what he said when we opened up. He said we need a self-help program, yo. And it's here. So that's what I come standing on as a traumatized traumatologist, supporting us with understanding and with healing, with understanding trauma, traumatic stress, what it is, how it has and continues to work, and bringing that revolutionary 12-step self-help program that has been uniquely designed with you and me, the African, in my mind when I designed the program, developed it. And it is designed to support our healing and recovering. The work that I offer as a communications coach also is designed to support your healing and recovering from a whole lot of life shit. Yeah, that's what therapy is all about. When people go to therapy, it's like they're trying to deal with some shit that happened in their life, whether it's loss of a loved one, loss of relationships, whether they are and or have been close in personal relationships, friendships, intimate connection, partnerships, marriages. Oh, good Lord, how many families are dealing with separations and loss of relationships with family members? Children and parents are disconnected in such a way that is like, wow, what happened? What happened? What has happened to us? And that's what I want to kind of talk about today in this evening in the recovery room of Racism Non Anonymous, hosting this meeting for myself, this Racism Non Anonymous meeting, to talk about some things recently that happened in my life, right? And one of the most recent events was my interview with Dr. Philip Schock on his podcast, Black Trauma, dealing with Black trauma, right? Where, let's see, I have stuff. Let me see. Anyway, we're dealing with Black trauma, the Black Trauma podcast. He calls it, yeah, the Black Trauma podcast. And it aired today, the premiere of my interview. And so there were, as I listened to it, some points that I wanted to clarify for myself. There were things that we talked about. There were questions that he asked that I would like to, delve a little deeper into and clarify. So that was my purpose for this meeting and this recording and what I wanted to do. So just, if I'm gonna just kind of go through initially some of the first points I heard, he asked me about what it was like going into treatment therapy in the 1980s, right? As a person of African descent, because of course, in our communities and in my growing up, going to therapy was not a thing that we did. It was not a thing that was encouraged. It was always a thing as I grew up in the 60s and 70s learning about therapy that was for those people. It wasn't for us, it was for white women who drank liquor out of a teacup. That was the message and the imagery that I understood about this thing called therapy, where you would go and lay on a couch and talk about your life. And there would be a person sitting behind you saying pretty much nothing, and you just got a chance to just lay on a couch and spill your fucking guts about your life. And it wasn't something that was encouraged for us folks. That was for folks who were weak and so forth. So, yet at the same time, for myself, growing up in the 60s and 70s, first as a child of African descent, a little black child, a little black female child with nappy, kinky hair, and a very bright, sharp mind, and very inquisitive, and very probably, I'm not sure when my gaze developed, whereby when I look at folks sort of directly, it seems to do something. It touches them. They feel touched, right? And I learned at one point in school, in college, that my gaze is very intense and it's very direct. And the instructor who in that class happened to be about addiction and recovery, drug and alcohol or something. He pointed out to me, how children who grow up in alcoholic family systems, we tend to be very tuned in, you know, and that look had something to do with that. I'll leave it at that. Now, one of my cats is really getting on my nerves right now. He is underfoot. He is the male, always the male, right under the feet and in a space where he's not supposed to be. Get out of my room, please. Thank you. Excuse me. Now, I would hope that you can hear what I'm hearing because I have my music playing always. Music is a primary tool in the recovery zone. And for me, like I always say, reggae right now is my go to. And it helps me collect myself and calm down, get a grip on myself. If you got someone who miss you, you better count your blessings. Look at that. Yeah, count. So, as I was saying, you know, going into treatment for me, when I went in the mid 80s, it was just, for me, it was a natural thing to do. even though in my home and community and family it was discouraged, because I was such a reader that I was, and because of the seer that I am, I always knew there was a part of me that knew or, believed, like, wait a minute, there's some stuff that didn't add up because I'm watching these folks on TV and the way their lifestyle and the way they living is, and I'm looking at what's happening over here and what's happening in my life and my community, and there is a very stark difference. And I understood that I wanted that life. And in my family life over here, they were encouraging and teaching me to believe that I could have that life. So the question was how to. And when I looked at these folks over here on their in their life on television shows, they went to therapists and they talked. And so I said, I think maybe I might need to do some of that. Because when I got myself in a situation, i.e., in the crack epidemic in the mid 80s, in my early 20s, as an adult now, and I'm out here in the world and, beginning to live life on life's terms and understand life's terms, like, oh, snaps, yo, there's some stuff going on that I'm not interested in. So I need to do what those folks did. They went to a therapist and they lay down on the couch and help. I need some damn help. I'm trying to figure some shit out, yo. And that's what therapy really is always been about. For me, it's a place to go to talk, to just kind of get some shit out of my head. Because when stuff is in our head, it's just rolling around, it's tight. When we have to talk about it, then you can get it out. You put it out, out. It's like writing something down. You can see it on paper. Different from experiencing it running around your mind. And because up in there are other parts that interact with that part that's saying this, and there's another part that has an answer, and another part that has a thought, and another part that has a belief, and they're all up in there together. And that's what happens when we become over flipping whelmed with it, right? And we just want to shut down and don't think about none of this shit. Nobody else coming up. Yeah, so that was the first question I wanted to address, what it was like. And for me, it was just a thing to do in the mid 80s. It's almost as if mm, yeah, it was almost as if no one really noticed me. No one really noticed what anyone was doing in the 80s in our communities because we were dealing with the AIDS and coming up out of that. And uh yeah, 86, 26, when I went into therapy and went into treatment, the community was in a whole, you know, up shit upheaval with AIDS moving out and crack cocaine coming in. So I don't think that we were really seeing each other and knowing each other so much. I knew at that age, for me, 26, I had been married for 4 years, got married too early, and married to a man who was also alcoholic. And then we were very religious. We were Christians, and some shit happened in the Christian church. Yeah, I didn't even get to that part, but some shit happened in the Christian church for me. Abuse, sexual, by the pastor, prior to my introduction to cocaine, crack cocaine, when I went into treatment. And as I said to Dr. Shock, I got in, I recognized I went in right at the curve. At 86 was right around the time where the system was changing in terms of how it provided services to particular populations. So I went in at a time where it was still, quote unquote, helpful and safe for even people of African descent. That was in the late 80s. However, it was in the early 90s where the research exploded around understanding trauma. Dr. Sandra Bloom, Linda Bills, there was the sanctuary at Friends Hospital, there was work being done. Dr. Judith Herman came out with her seminal work in 1994 addressing trauma and recovery from political violence to domestic abuse, from political terror to domestic abuse, I believe it is. That was in 94. Dr. Sandra Bloom and Linda Bills came out with their works, The Sanctuary Model, around the same time, sometime in the early 90s. Now, with Dr. Bills and Sandra Bloom, I was a patient. I was a patient in the late 80s at Friends Hospital where they were gathering research information about trauma, childhood trauma, and impact. So the work that Sandra Bloom was able to produce around the sanctuary model, I know I was a part, an original, part of those first cohorts of folks who were included in those studies and which helped them frame and shape the information that they had concluded based on the things that they learned from patients like myself in the mid to late 80s who were questioned and treated by them. In Friends Hospital, Dr. Linda Bills was my primary psychiatrist, and she worked very closely with my Black therapist that I had because I was outpatient and then I went in. And my therapist communicated with Dr. Bills and so forth. So upon my discharge, I followed up my work with my Black therapist, and that's how it was in the late 80s and early 90s. And much of the work that we understand and we know now about trauma and traumatic stress came from those earlier studies and work with patients like myself who wound up in the hospital back in the late 80s and early 90s, right? And we were there for addictions. Many people, crack addiction, cocaine addiction, 28-day programs were pretty prevalent at that time. And my grandmother at the time, and as I recall, and I will always remember, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was the only person seemingly for me at that time in the late 80s, 86, when I went to the hospital, when I started going back and forth into treatment for addiction and then depression. And, you know, my grandmother was the one person who called me and asked me about how I was doing with my classes, how I was doing. And she understood that I was doing something to help myself from what the community was offering at that time. I feel her presence. I feel her love right now, wrapped around my heart, and that energy in that memory of my life in my early 20s, some 40, almost 40 years ago. And really what it was like. And the rest of my family, for the most part, seemingly isolated me. They began to look at me and say things about me that was in line with the teaching in the Black community that said that if you went to therapy, if you went to the hospital for mental health stuff, that you were crazy, quote unquote. So I became the crazy one in the family. Crazy because I went to get some damn help and get off this shit that y'all all caught up on. That's the last. That's the thing I want to say. As I that's the one question I want to address from the interview that I had with Dr. Shock. That first question, I because I don't believe I really went into it as much as I could have, and as much as I think I did just now. Right. So I'm gonna take a slow break and a slow breath, and really hoping that you all can hear the music, because it is a lot to remember and recall events in our lives. And I understand this as a clinician and a coach that I am, to feel and put myself in the seat of those who come before me. Yeah, I can appreciate. What am I don't know where I'm at. What I'm understanding, what I'm appreciating as I'm kind of working to sit and settling my spirit from all of that I just dug up. Because talking about that period in that time in my life, and you know my grandmother, thinking about my grandmom and thinking about that time, it stirs up a lot of shit in our minds. And when we are thinking about shit, it triggers a feeling. And for the moment, I'm not quite sure how to describe what I am feeling with what I just stirred up within my mind and myself, right? Yet all of the energy is centered right around my eyes, my forehead, and my face here. It's a collection of energy that's just right in my eyes. It's sort of like having looked back at that time in my life. It's heavy. It's heavy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we use the breath to recenter, settle the sandstorm that got stirred up. It's this whole sandstorm of memories, right? They just kind of get stirred up, and we have the power, we have the tools. It's just about knowing how to use them. Hmm. The next question that came up that I kind of had a sense there was more I wanted to say about, had to do with his question about how my family dynamics, how the family dynamics lead us to hurtful behaviors that we have our own. So, an example of that would be, children growing up in an alcoholic family system and becoming alcoholic themselves. So they develop those bad behaviors that they grew up witnessing. That's the dynamic of the family system, that it is a family system that has been plagued with alcoholism, from the grandparent, the parents, the grandparents, the great grandparents, and you can trace it in your family genogram to get a better sense of what are the dynamics in my family that I want to look at, I want to explore, and I want to see how I may be carrying that particular legacy, and what, if any, steps I may need to develop for myself to divert from a pattern that I'm not interested in continuing. So if I come from a family pattern of alcoholism and I don't want to follow that path, I'm going to choose a new path for, the family. One thing about family systems is this: when any one part of the system changes, it forces a change in the whole system and the rest of the system. And I'm just seeing this connection for myself, how in my family system, one of the things that changed was people's perspective about me as a person and as a member of the family, based on the perception that I was, i.e., crazy, because I was the one who went to therapy and went into treatment. Therefore, I was, i.e., crazy because I went back to school and got college degrees. I became just someone with a bunch of quote unquote book knowledge and didn't mean much of anything. And that became the news story that the family carried about me. And is a very different story from the story I grew up with, whereby I was known as the one in the family where children really, you know, I was smart, I was intelligent, I was smart, I was deep. I had a really good connection with children. They listened to me. I was really good with them. Children loved me. I loved them. People saw that, commented on that in the family all the time. Yet later in my mid to late 20s, I became something very different as I made the choices that I did. A, to go into treatment, stay away from crack cocaine epidemic, to complete my college degree in education and work as a social worker in the field, helping Black family. And for that, from my family, what I got was a whole lot of backlash. And I got the backlash blues, like Nina Simone would say. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna just leave that there. You check out Nina Simone Backlash Blues, the Backlash Blues, because our people behave just like them people, and so you end up with the same shit. So I'm gonna end it for now. That's a start for the night. I don't want to keep you too long. But that's what happens with the family dynamics. In terms of how it supports, it encourages, and enables these quote unquote bad behaviors. Addiction is a family illness. Everybody is affected and impacted. And when it is left untreated, it is passed down because children live what they learn. And if children grew up learning how to drink, how to clean it up, how to take care of the drunk, if that's what they grow up learning, that's what they'll grow up living. Either taking care of drunks and or becoming a drunk themselves. Because that's how they learn how to manage feelings. That's what they learned to do. They learned it from you, the parent. And unless and until they go somewhere and get some other options and gain some support and some tools for making a change, they're likely to continue those quote unquote bad behaviors. Yet, and at the same time, recognizing that those, we're not born with a gene for bad behaviors. Nobody is born with a gene for bad behaviors. That shit is learned. So I'm just from the school. I'm from the nurture school. What is it? Nature versus nurture. I'm from the nurture school. That shit is nurtured in you. You learn that. It's not, you don't come born with a gene that supports your destruction. That shit was programmed in us. We were programmed to self-destruct. When we came to this planet, when you're born on this planet, you're not born with a fucking gene to self-destruct. Understanding that the behaviors of alcoholism and other addictions hurt us, mind, body, and or spirit, right? You don't come with a gene to self-destruct. That shit is programmed into us. We are come with all of the tools we need for life, thriving, growing, and changing, and surviving, healing, repairing. That's what we come preloaded with. And we're born into quote unquote sin. We're born into a system that is sinful in the way that it hurts people intentionally for personal gain. Ain't that some shit? That's the shit. Now we working to clean up, so to speak. At any rate, we recognize it's there, and we taking one little piece and one little step at a time, starting with ourselves and getting this shit up out of our hearts and minds. Right? So stick around, stay with me, and you'll see. Until next time, thanks for listening to me share.